I guess I put together some hopefully not entirely random thoughts about reputation systems, and I tried to more specifically express some of my views about the project, which I believe are still valid after this morning's discussion, so I'm going to go ahead with them. I think I have to stay here, given the limitations of the equipment. So given the discussion this morning, I believe it might be useful to just go through some slides and establish a framework for reputation systems, maybe some common language that might be useful in subsequent discussion in tomorrow's working groups. And then I will make some points that I believe are important to take into consideration in this project. So first of all, these are some slides that I have put together a couple of years ago when I attempted to build a framework for what's a reputation system, what are some of the key design decisions and some of the distinctions. Okay, so I have a very broad definition for a reputation system that also I believe address some of Dimitri's, let's say, contrarian feelings about what it is, right? To me, a reputation is a summary of past actions, so it doesn't necessarily have to confer a judgment, okay? It can be something which is as neutral as just a set of statistics or even a history of actions, and it can be something as pointed as a score or someone's rank, okay? So the whole spectrum to me is a continuum of what I would call a reputation. And consequently, a reputation system is a system that mediates and automates the process of assessing one's reputation, okay? So in that context, a reputation system has to keep track of some of users' actions. And as I will discuss, I mean, what actions we're keeping track of are already important because, you know, implicitly or explicitly, this creates incentives or disincentives for certain activities within the system. And at the same time, the system is aggregating and displaying some summary statistics from those actions, right? And an additional thing which is not on the slide is on the basis of that aggregation, the user and the user's content is somehow receiving either some privileges or some penalties. So it can be rank ordered in a certain way, and the user can have more or less privileges in the system. Okay. Now, what's important is that reputation systems are playing a multiplicity of roles, and in different communities, let's say the relative importance of those roles is different. And that's an important thing to settle up front, because depending on which of those roles is more important, this has implications for the specific design of the system, okay? So most people, I guess historically, when we talk about a reputation system, we talk about trust. And Carl also used this word repeatedly in his address. But trust to me is only one out of many possibilities for why we use a reputation system. So I have a very precise definition of trust. So I tie trust to the economics concept of moral hazard, right? So if you want to establish trust, you want to somehow build in place mechanisms that give you some confidence that people are going to behave in the way you want, okay? So to me, the reputation system where trust is the most important component is eBay, right? In the case of eBay, you want to put in place something that will give incentives to people to be honest, okay? And that's the main role. There are other roles, but that's the main overarching role of that system. That is not the only possibility and the only mission of a reputation system, right? In other systems, or in some cases in the same system, you're also interested in quality filtering. So this relates to the economics concept of adverse selection. So in that case, you're not trying so much to influence behavior. Behavior happens, okay? Stuff happens, some of it is good, some of it is bad. People create content, they write books, they write reviews, they have different abilities, they cannot help it. Some of them are more gifted, some of them are less gifted. What you want is you want a system that will try to point you to the good ones, or try to separate the good ones from the bad ones, for the purpose of essentially reducing the search cost of the user, right? So you want to make it easy for people to figure out what's good, right? So implicit in this is that there exists some mutually agreed or consensual notion of quality, right? And I would argue that this is the case only in very, very few domains. And also what attribute specifies quality is something that also is a very important element of discussion behind any reputation system. So it's difficult, I mean, most real-life systems, they address all of those in different perspectives, but, you know, in my view, for example, let's say Amazon's reputation system for reviews there are some relatively commonly defined notions of what's a good review, what's a bad review, so it's trying to somehow separate the chaff from the wheat from the chaff in terms of the quality of reviews, right? Okay, now where it gets interesting, however, is that there's a lot of domains where there is no concrete notion of quality, okay? Where there things are heterogeneous and things are subjective, right? In that case, there is still a need for a reputation system, but the need is different. In my view, the most important role of a reputation system in those systems is to help, let's say, users match with one another, right? So for example, to me, a system where this is an important consideration is Yelp. I mean, Yelp is about restaurant reviews, about you know, bar reviews, things like that. And there is a big amount of subjectivity there. So people, yes, there are some elements which are, you know, relatively uniform, like the quality of service, but, you know, whether you like a particular cuisine or not, that might depend on who you are. And then when I go to Yelp, what's important to me is to get a sense for how close I am to the particular user who writes a review, okay? So there, it doesn't make sense to have, let's say, unidimensional rankings of users or of reviews or of establishments. What is more important is to give enough information to the reader so that they can make an assessment with respect to how much they feel close to the writer, and therefore they, I mean, trust is not really the right word there, how much they feel that they can work with the opinions that the producer has produced, okay? So that's very important because, I mean, a lot of the discussion that we had this morning has this implicit or not so implicit assumption that there is a notion of quality. And that's not always the case, okay? And this is complicating things a lot in the domains where it's not difficult. I mean, it's complicating them, but, you know, there's a way to design, but this design has to be much more personalized, much more relative and fluid than designs for domains where there's a clear notion of what's good and what's bad, okay? And of course, last but not least, and that was very clear in the great discussion we had about Stack Overflow and Reddit, I mean, reputation systems are at the same time playing an important role in inducing participation and loyalty, okay? And in some cases, you will see that some of the top 3 goals are in conflict with the 4th goal, right? To give you just a simple example, think of, for example, eBay, right? On eBay, if you have the standard score that keeps growing, right? This is good for loyalty because people want to keep the score, they want to have a higher and higher score, but it's bad in terms of building trust because once somebody has built a high score, then they can start cheating occasionally and it doesn't really matter because people don't care if someone has a score of, I don't know, 1,000 or above, they don't really care. So you can see that sometimes the participation incentive complicates the design of the other one. So I believe that one thing that we need to decide as a group with respect to hypothesis is, you know, what are we doing here? What's the priority for all the different goals? Okay, I just wanted to set, you know, the stage and just give those dimensions. I know that they're implicit in your minds, but, you know, in some cases they're explicit, but in case they're not, I just thought I'd spend a slide discussing them. Okay, so let me just go forward. I mean, these are 4 dimensions of design. There are some more. It's important to decide what inputs to solicit about, basically what types of activities of a user or what attributes of the products of the user you want to keep track of, okay? That's definitely not an innocuous decision because, you know, if you keep track of something, either you are encouraging or discouraging it depending on the nuance it has, right? How they will be presented is also very important, okay? And I will just touch upon it in a moment. How transparent will be the rules people made, and that includes also the question of identity, right? And also how reputation evolves over time, right? And I guess the 5th one, which I didn't mention here, is what is the impact of reputation in terms of the user's privileges and within the system, right? Okay, now the presentation of outputs is a very important decision. There's a continuum going all the way from, you know, simple statistics. I mean, if you go to Yelp, for example, which I think is a reasonably well-designed system for the context, if you go, there are lots of different statistics for a user. I mean, you know, the number of reviews, the number of friends, the number of endorsements of different friends on the reviews, etc., etc. There's no single score, right? I mean, so it tries to be relatively neutral, okay? And then you can go all the way from star rating, score, named levels, achievement badges, and to me the ultimate, at the other end of the spectrum, is leaderboards, right? Where you basically pit users against each other and then you compute a rank, okay? And as you see, there's a continuum from being, let's say, neutral to being what I call competitive, okay? And you have to be very careful because, I mean, you have to match the competitiveness, the position of the statistics you keep about users to the actual spirit of the community, right? I mean, a classic, if for example we have some well-publicized stories, Dig was perhaps the one that comes to mind most closely, that if you try to be too competitive, right, have leaderboards where they're not warranted, what happens is that, you know, the people start forming cliques and try to play games just to maintain the ranking, and the whole behavior degenerates, right? In which case you are better off just not having those. And in many cases, just having plain statistics without any explicit attempt to form, let's say, rankings and scores could be just as well, because then people can make up their own mind about how much to trust the information or its source, right? So these are important dimensions to keep in mind. Okay, so, and I guess I have a paper at Sloan Masbury Review that attempts to give you the beginnings of some, let's say, framework that if you, for example, I'm not gonna go through this now, but if you guys wanna read it, if your goal is to build trust, then you should present information in this way. If your goal is to promote quality, then you should do it in this way. You know, I have this table, which is probably too much for now. Okay, so I just wanted to outline those dimensions, and maybe it would be interesting for us and useful in the discussion that will follow. I guess the other point I want to make is that we must not forget that our users are human. So what do I mean by that? In some ways, this reflects my experience, or my, how do I call it, my slight disappointment after being a game theorist for a number of years, right? So game theory has a very unidimensional concept of what it means to be human, right? So you have a utility function that also takes into consideration very few things, and you are a perfect information processor, okay? So those assumptions are not correct. So humans are not perfect information processors, and also the utility function, as we are finding out, as we're rediscovering, in fact, contains many more dimensions than the kind of unidimensional kind of monetary utility that economics assumes. So we know by now, and Carl very correctly said, that marketing is in fact a very good source of this information, that humans are extremely quirky when it comes to how they process online information and then make decisions. We know a lot about, I mean, marketing, and my field, information systems, has done a lot of work in terms of studying online product reviews. And we have found a lot of things that at surface seem a little counterintuitive, but there's a pattern emerging. Let me just give you two of those findings. So for example, my friend Eric Clemons at Wharton did a study of how hotel reviews affect, let's say, hotel revenues, okay? And he found some interesting findings. For example, Carl said that he looks at negative reviews, but this is not entirely true. I mean, this only is true when you look at budget hotels, okay? When you look at luxury hotels, negative reviews had no impact whatsoever. Only the top 25% of positive reviews mattered for those hotels. I mean, there is a clear explanation, because budget hotels are utilitarian products. I mean, you basically worry about the downside. You basically want to know how bad it is, right? So you care about negatives. For luxury hotels, you know it's not bad, but you also know you're going to pay a fortune for it, so you care about the fit, right? You don't care about quality anymore, you care about the fit, which is how close it is to your individual tastes. So what you care about is you want to read between the lines of the positive reviews and figure out whether the hotel has the specific attributes that you are looking for, right? Some of my colleagues did some study of CNET software downloads, for example, there, and they found that the valence of reviews doesn't matter at all, and what matters is the volume. So essentially the whole thing was social herding, and people didn't care at all about what people wrote about that software. So again, this matters for us because this means that in certain situations, people are just going to look at where there is lots of activity, and no matter how much annotation we have, they're going to ignore it. Okay. So some even more disturbing findings. I just did a little sampling of 2 or 3 literature findings, and we can discuss many more if you want. Here is something which I found particularly interesting and troublesome, right? So this is a study by Brendan Nyhan, right? That I know works with Paul and a colleague. So these guys did experimental study using students as subjects, and they found that if there is some false fact report in the press, and then you give them a correction, depending on people's pre-existing political views, after people receive and register, the correction is understood, and you ask them again about their views, they can be even more polarized. So there was this false fact that was basically perpetuated by the conservatives, that the Bush tax cut increased the revenue. And after it was corrected, then liberals changed their opinion a little bit, but conservatives were believing it even more strongly than before. So if you have this kind of behavior, then just giving them the truth doesn't work. So the question there is, what do we do? I mean, we don't have an answer to that, right? I mean, clearly what we need to do, and this is really at the frontier of what we know, I don't think that any field has solved this question, is how do we design a system that potentially gives information in a certain skewed way that compensates for people's skewed information processing, so that what in my opinion is what matters, the decisions they make or the perceptions they have, are, let's say, correct, or at least, let's say, socially optimal. So I don't know if this makes sense. I mean, but we haven't really solved this problem, which means that we might put all the effort in the world to come up with a truthful and balanced and diverse system, only to find out that it doesn't really change people's perceptions or people's decisions in the direction we want. Okay, and we have to be aware of that. Okay, the other point I want to make is that reputation is not the only means to what we want, right? So I'm assuming that you view reputation as the most promising driver for creating incentives for participation, and also for good contributions, and of course for filtering, right? So people are motivated by a range of incentives, right? And I guess in a paper I call them the money, love, and glory framework, right? So money, more broadly, is material rewards. So for example, either you get money or you have some career benefits out of participating. So what we discussed before, people participate to Stack Overflow because this is going to help them in the resume. So this is, to me, a material motivation because there's something to be gained at the end of it. Then you have glory, and by glory I mean pure status. So we care about reputation because it can open doors for us, but we also care about it intrinsically, because as human beings we are wired to care about status, about a relative standing in a community. So a lot of reputation mechanisms really kind of take advantage or harness our need for status. But then, and I would say that money and glory I think they are within the framework of what a reputation system can provide. But then there is also this other category, which is less understood because it's less easy to model, right? Which is all the intrinsic intensities, what I call love, right? So there are lots of studies, and Paul Resnick and Robert Kraut published a fantastic book, which I recommend it as one of the readings. Sorry? It's not out yet? Good, that's good news, because that means that the PDFs are still available for online, right, for free. So guys, load them up before the book is out. So Paul and Robert, they have a fantastic book where they basically they catalog everything we know from social science experiments about community, what drives community participation, contribution, etc. And they have lots of very nice examples of various things that make people participate in communities that have, of course, nothing to do with reputation. Like, for example, someone mentioned, how do we get people the right tax, right? So it has been shown that if you emphasize to somebody their unique contribution, say, listen, you are the only person in our community who knows about X, right? And whatever you say about X is really valuable because you're the only person and everybody else relies on you. I mean, if you say somebody that, this really motivates them to do something. And even if you don't publicize anywhere that they've done this, right? And to me, Wikipedia is a good example because Wikipedia does not have an explicit reputation mechanism, and yet people contribute a lot. This contribution is driven on their feeling of purpose and on their all these intrinsic motivations there. So, there's a lot we can learn from social sciences on this point, right? And I think we should consider, in addition to reputation, taking advantage as much as we can of potential intrinsic incentive, let's say, enhancers. I mean, like, somehow directing people into the kinds of articles or content where they can make a difference or where we think there could be a good match. I mean, without necessarily giving them any incentive or reward. I mean, all these things in conjunction maybe with reputation can be very valuable. Okay. Anyway, and of course, what's very important is that all these different kinds of incentives, they interact with one another in ways which, again, we are slowly learning. Let me give you an example from the SAP developer network. So this is, well, you may know of this. So this is an internal network for SAP developers to exchange knowledge. And SAP is offering a point system that originally led to personal rewards. And in a way, and a behavior similar to Dig emerged. So there was a bullying community, so there were some people who basically wanted to get points, and they were exerting pressure to others to give the thumbs up to their postings. It was a little bit what happened in Dig, was happening in that network. So when they changed, then they changed the system, and they kept the point system, but they didn't give you any rewards anymore. They just said, at the end of the year, you can put your points towards charity. So what happened was that contributions did not go down, and bullying stopped. Okay, so this just gives you an example of how combinations of incentives interact, and how sometimes the combinations are not what you would expect. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so another point related to what I said. So, well, you guys who speaks Latin here, even if you don't speak Latin, you have seen this wording, right? My grandfather, who was a judge and therefore had to learn Latin, he was saying it to me a lot. Right, which means that, for a lot of information, there's no right or wrong. People have their own tastes, and they're entitled to them. Okay, so I just want to bring this point again, that for a lot of areas, for a lot of domains, we should really acknowledge that and build the system accordingly, right? And of course, what's the answer? I mean, one answer is personalization. And then, of course, Dan will tell me what about the filter bubbles, right? Another answer, which I promised to make a slide, because I discussed it with him last night, is my dial, right? So this is actually something that I was expecting Facebook to create and didn't. It's basically, it would be nice if we had a dial that allowed us to choose and say, at this point, I want to see all the opinions of people like me, or people who agree with my viewpoint, and I want to see the opposite viewpoint. And I want to see the weirdos and outliers, or I want to see the whole thing, and see how balanced it is and see all the different things. So I think that's something to consider as part of the design. Okay, and I guess this is something I raised this morning, which is content. Some content is more subjective than other content. So, a fashion review is subjective, a statistical analysis is objective. Either it's false or it's true, right? A prediction about the future is somewhere in between, right? So I have some doubts as to whether we can have a single design for all content. I mean, the more I hear the discussion evolving, the more I believe that either we should start with a single domain where we believe there's a need and an opportunity, and have a design that works for this, and take it from there and see how the community and the world evolves around us. It would be very, very difficult to just shoot for a generic system from the get-go, okay? Okay, and then my last point You know, when Dan approached me with this idea, I thought this is a great idea. But does the world really need yet another attention thing, right? I mean, right now I feel pressure to post on Facebook because all my colleagues are there and I have to kind of be smart. I still am not active on Twitter because somehow I haven't found my voice there. I get all these emails from Quora because I've answered a couple of questions and now they're emailing me wherever they think there's a topic that is worth my attention. And now we will have Hypothes.is, which is yet another place where I have to spend time and attention. And what's interesting is that bits and pieces of what we want to do are already happening, right? At the bottom of blog postings, at Facebook, Twitter, at Quora, right? I mean, there are parts of, I mean, you know, when someone retweets a URL, you're already in some ways annotating it, right? And there is discussion as this retweet kind of propagates through the network, right? So the question is, to me, is how can we integrate and leverage these activities and communities? And this is not just a cold start problem. I think by calling it a cold start problem, you say this is something we're going to do at the beginning, and then somehow once we, I mean, but aren't we creating yet another silo, yet another closed community? I mean, even if we call it open, it's yet another system that will exist alongside all the other systems and try to do, in some ways, something which already happens. So what about if we think integrating what we are about to do with what exists right from the get-go and considering our effort, not just a reputation community, but a combination of, you know, somehow bringing together what already happens, right? I mean, if there is a lot of activity about a piece of content on Twitter, I mean, this is public information. We should either have statistics about it or just the whole thing, right? Or if something happens on Facebook and somehow we have access to it, we should know about it. If there's Quora discussion about a particular content, I mean, we should have it there and available for the user. And of course, there are lots of other ideas we can discuss, which is we can even build widgets and apps that integrate into Facebook. So for example, when we do something on Hypothes, this is posted on our wall. I mean, why would it be good? Because if I want to post something about some interesting content, it will save me the effort of doing it in two places. I don't have to choose anymore between Facebook or Hypothes, right? So there are lots of ideas, but the bottom line, so summary. Reputation systems are one possible means to an end, okay? So we have to discuss what is our end. I don't think we're very clear about that yet, okay? And also what are potential alternative means. I mean, yeah, I mean, in most cases we'll need some form of reputation, but this might not be the whole story or the only story. Designed for humans and their cognitive quirks, just doing everything great and perfect under the assumption of perfect information processing is not going to get us necessarily where we're going to go. Recognize and honor heterogeneity of interests and opinions, so personalize or do something related. And then integrate as much as possible with other curation and aggregation activity happening online. Okay, so these are my thoughts. Thank you very much.